Welcome with Clarive and DBmaestro, called DevOps Platform for the Evolving Enterprise. Before we begin, please, all of you will be on mute for the duration of the event. Please type in a message in the question box in the control panel if you can hear us. But before, please check your speakers and WebEx audio settings first. If you have any questions during the session, please submit them on the Q&A bar on your WebEx dashboard, and we will address them at the end. A recording of the full webinar will be put up online. The outline of the webinar will be, first of all, best practices of continuous delivery for modern applications, then DevOps Platform for the Evolving Enterprise, the reasons why the database is often left behind, database continuous delivery from deployment to build to deploy, and afterwards, Q&A. Let me present you Cindy Bean, which is a senior software consultant at DBmaestro. She spent over 20 years working with various databases management projects for Oracle, SQL Server, and other relational database systems as a DBA, project manager, and consultant. And we have Eddie Powell, our VP of Sales and Marketing at Clarive. He's an experienced IT professional. Eddie has a master's degree in computer science from the University of Brussels. In the last 25 years, he specialized in application and service lifecycle management. Eddie is a respected coach within organizations to implement agile, lean IT, and performance-based service management principles.
So I'm assuming you handed it over to me, Sarah?
Yes, completely to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Let me actually start with a couple of challenges that I see in the market, and especially also in our community of customers when it comes to application delivery in general. When you're looking at the challenges organizations are facing today, you can group the challenges into three key buckets. The first one is in the middle, is challenges that are deployment related. And in that bucket, you see things like the quality of the deployment being challenged, the lead time being too long, issues with the agility and the maintainability of the deployment scripts being created, and last one is how to actually deal with the increased number of platforms and the flexibility around the platforms that organizations have. And more precisely, they're being challenged of orchestrating the deployment across multiple platforms, especially to try to transition from one type of to another. And I see in big banks and in big telco organizations, a lot of shift between mainframe platforms or Unix platforms to cloud platforms, and that means that at some point you have a hybrid between different platforms, and you would like to orchestrate the deployment of a new release across all those platforms. The second bucket is around execution. How do you actually orchestrate the process across different teams and across different tools that those teams might be using? Secondly, how do you actually share and collaborate on discussion topics or on assets between those teams, whether it's a development team or a QA team or a database team or operations team? If you're not deploying in a continuous fashion, which there is a lot of focus in, especially in the DevOps area, to deploy and to work in a continuous mode. Now, many organizations, especially big organizations, will agree with me that it's not all black and white. Not everything can be done in a continuous mode yet, although it might be the ultimate goal for many. But if you're not going in a continuous mode, then you still need to schedule and plan so that things are aligned and synced between the different platforms. So how do you actually manage cross-platform planning and scheduling? And the last one is, if you're not going to deploy and run in a continuous mode, how are you actually going to align your DevOps strategy according to the different types of applications that you have in your organization? The last bucket of challenges has to do with getting visibility and insight and actually managing the process from an end-to-end perspective. If you really would like to go into DevOps and you really would like to get the benefits of a continuous flow and a delivery at the speed of business, you need to look at the process from an end-to-end point of view. And you need to get real-time insight so that you also can get impact analysis across all the different disciplines that take part in the delivery process. going from demand management to development to testing to provisioning to deployment. Now, the ultimate goal in any organization is to maximize business value and do this at the speed of business, at the speed that the business wants it. And this is actually a challenge for many organizations, but you see initiatives being done in driven by two types of angles. And Sarah, I'm trying to move my slide here, but it does not seem to be working properly. That's what I was missing. Yeah, that's better. So if you're looking at the drivers and initiatives being created within organizations, then you see that you can actually have two types of teams that trigger initiatives in order to be able to maximize business value at the speed of business. On the left-hand side, you actually have the delivery or the development teams, and their focus is on increasing delivery speeds and actually increasing business agility, with a focus on the application delivery process, predominantly around the development, QA, build, and release cycle. So they try to optimize the coordination, the collaboration, and the integration between the different teams and tools. They like to automate whatever they can automate when it comes to build, test, deployment to the development platforms. And they would like to actually standardize where they can standardize. On the other hand, you see a lot of initiatives being driven from the operations point of view, where the ops teams are trying to increase efficiency and reduce total cost of ownership, where the focus is on service delivery processes. So in essence, they do a kind of the same thing, but their focus is slightly different. So, and that's what you see in the middle. They also try to concentrate on coordination, collaboration, and integration, on automation, and on governance and insight, but their focus is more on the service providers and business collaboration. They actually are focusing more on release delivery, environment provisioning, monitoring, and recovery. And the focus is on the delivery process end-to-end. But if you would like to get a platform and an environment that supports both, you need to have a platform that concentrates on those aspects that are in the middle. So that brings up the next point. If you're actually looking at the at organizations today, you see that they are in a constant transition towards a more flexible way of maintaining their applications, and that means that they need to actually go from a landscape and an architecture that is characterized by the left-hand side of my balance being highly interconnected architectures, a release management process which is typically driven top-down because everything is interconnected, the number of changes being infrequent and typically being big just because everything is so interconnected, a software development lifecycle that is still mainly waterfall driven, although attempts are being made to do it more agile, but it's actually struggling just because everything is so interconnected. And typically those initiatives and changes are driven by operations because you need to assess the impact, and since everything is interconnected, the risks are high. So this is where a lot of agile-related processes come into play, etc., because you don't want to screw the production environment. On the right-hand side, you see where a lot of organizations will like to go to, and they would like to transition their architectures and their processes so that they are working more with microservices, more loosely coupled architectures, have a release management process that is more bottom-up, so driven by the delivery teams, where they actually can have more smaller and frequent changes, ideally continuously, and implement more and more software development lifecycle that is based on Agile. Now, the reality is that it's not all black and white. It's not that today you're working on the left-hand side type of architecture and tomorrow you will be working on the right-hand side architecture. So there is an evolution there. And what is needed is something that allows organizations to start today. So they need to have a DevOps platform that actually is following the evolving enterprise from left to right. What I see in the market is most of the DevOps tools are focusing on just a small aspect of it, which is predominantly the deployment capabilities and automation there, but they assume already a lot of the criteria that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. And what we believe is that organizations would like to start now. They would like to automate what they can automate. They would like to share and collaborate as much as possible. They would like to evolve their sourcing strategies change the way how they manage and measure the progress inside the processes, implement more lean principles, and change the organizational culture. That means that they need to be able to start from here, as of today, and when they are moving towards the reshaping of their architectures and processes, that they can continue to use the same platform all the way when they are towards the right-hand side or somewhere in the middle. Now, if you look at the release management process in particular, then you see that the left-hand side is typically characterized by a top-down release management process, which means very much it will base, you have instance, change requests, you have new projects coming in. These are actually, once they are approved by the advisory board, will be assigned to a release. And when the release actually is approved and they actually go into implementation, then the other teams, the delivery teams or the development teams, are going to start developing and testing and validating in the various environments the code and the changes that need to be made. And the release actually is following a release process. This is typically top-down, so no code is going to start to be created unless things have been approved. The other side is the bottom-up release management approach, where development teams on their platforms in sprints or in iterations are going to develop new enhancements and fix issues, test it on the local environments, and then at some point they would like to lump whatever actually is ready on a platform into a release. They bucket into a release, and then it will float as a package throughout the other environments all the way to production. This is a bottom-up release management approach, which is pretty well covered with most of the deployment and release automation tools or DevOps tools that you find on the market today. But the former one actually is more challenging. But what we see in our customer base is that, well, since you're never, you're not always in a left or a right side mode, you actually are transitioning. That means you very often see hybrid release management approaches where the vast majority is still done in a top-down fashion, and the new client-facing projects, they actually are already working towards agile principles and lean methods, and they actually are going to work bottom-up way. So that means that you need to be able to be flexible in your mechanisms for managing a release, and this is what we actually, as Clarive, try to allow organizations to do. So that means if you're looking at the types of platforms and the flexibility that you need, you see today things like cloud, like ERP systems, like mobile platforms, open systems, mainframe systems, virtual systems, lots of databases. So how you actually can orchestrate this all together in a synchronized fashion so that you avoid having to use a myriad of tools in order to be able to get it done. And at the end, if you're having many different tools that you need to work with, you very often end up having a lot of manual activities that you need to do at the end in order to be able to combine all the dots together. So this is where we as an organization, Clarive, come in, where we provide a DevOps platform for the evolving enterprise. What do I mean by that? Well, we provide you with a platform that allows the initiatives from the development teams as well as from the operational teams in the types of things that they want. So that means we provide automation, coordination, collaboration, integration, and audit or governance across all the intersections. That means we can actually allow collaboration between all the key stakeholders in your process, whether it's development, QA, operations, or database managers, and we do that also on all platforms that you might have. So whether it's open system platforms, mobile platforms, the cloud, ERP systems, but also mainframe or databases. And it's particularly in the area of databases that we partner with companies like DBmaestro because we find a lot of synergy with their approach towards how you can deploy and manage changes and update and deploy to databases with other platforms. And if you orchestrate that well, you have a very cohesive, comprehensive, complementary set that allows you to manage the process from an end-to-end fashion. And why is this end-to-end fashion important? That's what you see here at the left-hand side. We would like to provide you with end-to-end visibility and governance by allowing you to collaborate with what you have from demand all the way to production and use the tools that you might have and you would like to continue to use, so we don't force a rip and replace, but we would like to give you direct and dynamic insight in your DevOps initiative from demand to production, giving value to both the development teams as well as the operational teams, and try to go across the silos, the boundaries that people have created inside their organizations which makes it hard to actually just get a visibility into the process. Now, in each of those areas, we actually give lifecycle support. That means when we actually create a rule or a script, as some people call it, or a package or a recipe or whatever, we actually provide lifecycle support at the application level. So we version control and we allow you to work with versions of code, but we also like you to work with versions of provisioning scripts and deployment scripts and build scripts. So everything in Clarive is under version control and change tracking. So you know exactly with what version of the business logic it was actually provisioned, with what version of the provisioning logic and with what version of the deployment logic onto a particular platform. So you know, you can recreate whatever you want. I could even, if I want to, replay at any point in time and see who touched what when at what point in time, so that you get full traceability and insight. So in reality, how does that work in practice? If I'm going to the next slide, then you see that we allow you to make dependencies and relationships between all sorts of discussion topics in the process. And when in the process, topics like a release or a change set move or transition from one status to the next, or driven by a trigger, like for example, there is a new commit done on a Subversion or a Git or a GitHub or a rational clear case revision repository change, then it triggers a script, which we call a rule, and that will actually take the information from the proper environment. It will take the revisions from all the different assets inside that package, and it will then go into a pre-phase, a run phase, and a post phase. And in a nutshell, what that means is that in the pre-phase, it will do all the preparation work to make sure that the binaries are there, ready to be deployed on the target platform. So it will go and see how it needs to build the binaries for the Amazon deployment. It will see how it needs to compile for the mainframe or for WAR files or CPP files. So depending on the nature, you can specify what needs to happen. It can also in the pre do some provisioning before it actually starts the actual deploy. In the run, that's in the next phase, is where the actual binaries are going to be put and going to be sent onto the target platforms. And we actually support agentless or agents. We actually don't impose any mechanism in our systems, because we would like to provide flexibility to our customers. So we have pull agents, push agents. We actually can work with SSH. We can work with FTP. We can work with whatever you want. And finally, in the post step, this is where you typically do the cleanup of maybe temporary files that you created, or when you would like to do the CMDB updates. So we actually can facilitate that as well if that's required. And at the same time, we actually allow you to define the push forward strategy as well as the rollback strategy. So per line item, you can specify if it fails, what should you do? Then finally on this slide, the same rule can be applied on every platform. So no cloning of rules or scripts for different platforms, which makes maintenance and agility a nightmare. We actually have this abstraction called an environment template, where you actually can set environment settings for each application and scope and for each environment. So you can say, okay, if you're going to use the script, then the value of the C compiler should be a server. It should be this server for common or for development or for testing and so on. So you can do that for parameter settings, for file servers, for other logic. So any CI can be in there, which means that you can use the same rule for forward, so promote, for rollback, and any environment with just a single rule, which gives you a lot of flexibility. And on top of that, it's version control, as I said before, as well as change tracking is turned on. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, just a quick note on the other functionalities that I described before I turn it over to Cindy. And for whatever reason, I don't know if somebody's touching the mouse. Sometimes it's moving, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't seem to be moving to the next slide. Sarah, can you actually just give me control again? Yeah, or Sarah, just move the slide. That's probably easier because I'm losing time here. Just go. Yeah, okay. So when it comes to collaboration coordination, you would like to collaborate and coordinate between all the stakeholders and across all the tools. So I would like the development team, to QA teams, to the operational teams to share discussion topics, to chat with one another, to exchange assets with one another, and do this across all platforms, across lifecycle boundaries, and across tools that they have. So if, for example, you would do everything in Clarive, we can come up with a process model that looks something like you see on a screenshot. We have incident, problem, and change requests for the operations teams, and for traditional development teams, you have things like releases, projects, defects, requirements, test cases, or tasks. Or for sprint or agile teams, you have things like sprints, backlogs, user stories, etc. But if, however, you have, for example, for service management, you already have a tool in place like ServiceNow, or for development, you might have a tool like called Jira, then we can say, okay, let's take ServiceNow as being the prime lead for some of the service management processes, like, for example, what you see in the screenshot. We take ServiceNow for change requests, we map change requests. I don't want to map every field here, so we're only going to map the number, the title, and description, because the prime process owner is ServiceNow. But in order to have end-to-end traceability and to know some of the content inside the context of application delivery and development, I might actually would like to copy some of the data so that the development teams know what is there without having to go to ServiceNow, so that you avoid that they have to go across different tools in order to be able to see what the data is. So you can select and tune and configure what type of data you would like to get across. And secondly, you can also do the mapping of the statuses. So not every status in ServiceNow, if ServiceNow is taking the change request, need to be copied inside Clarive, because Clarive's focus is around change requests in the context of getting them developed. So all the preparation work and the initial phases in the ITIL process, when it comes to evaluating and analyzing and doing impact analysis of change requests, that can remain in ServiceNow up to the point that it becomes an approved change request and it now needs to go into development. It's at that point you can say, okay, now it goes into an area where it actually needs to be copied into Clarive. And then when in Clarive you're actually going to start building on it, I would like to, at some point, update ServiceNow on a regular basis so that the system there knows, okay, now it's in development, it's now in testing, etc., so that they keep up to date with regards to where it is in the process. So all that can be configured. Next slide, Sarah. Another thing with regards to coordination is coordination for the release teams and the environment teams. So how do you actually can mitigate or set stage gates? And that's something that Cindy will also talk about. We can actually set quality gates where we say, hey, you cannot put something on a pre-production or a UAT environment unless some quality standards have been set. And you actually can, you need to interact and coordinate with the database owners so that you know how you can deploy things on a certain environment. But very often when you're going across environments, you need to have a way to manage and plan properly if it's not going to be continuous. So that means that I might have release windows of where I can actually put things on certain servers, and the system needs to take that into account. I need to start planning my environment so that I know which releases or which versions of code are going to be on what type of environment at any point in time. So if it's not continuous, you need to have a way to manage the release windows, manage the environment, etc. So we actually support this level of coordination collaboration as well across all platforms. Next slide. And then when it comes to auditability and insight, we would like to gain information from all the different tools that were involved and from all the activities that happen in the application delivery process. And we allow you to create dynamic, real-time dashboards that actually can cover data from an end-to-end perspective based on the pieces of information that we extracted or exchanged between the different tools. And we can do that based on status as well as on activity, so that we can measure and manage at any point in level. We can actually create dashboards that you see here, either at role level or at application level, but we also could do that at release level or at project level or sprint level, so we can go to any level of detail that you would like to be in. And all the data here is clickable, so it's drillable, so that you can use that data and that information for reporting as well as for impact and dependency analysis. Next slide. So finally, when it comes to integration, integration is important in two areas. Integration is important at the back end. So when it comes to when you have binaries that you would like to put them into a certain environment or in a certain platform, that means that you need to automate whatever you can automate, and their integration is needed. So when it's in the build tools or retesting tools or deployment tools or rollback or collaboration across all platforms. And the other one is around lifecycle support. Now, it's in this area where Cindy is going to talk specifically around deployment towards databases, because databases for us as Clarive is just another target platform, as would be your mainframe or your cloud environment or your open system. So here, instead of saying it's an Amazon deployment or a ZOS deployment, you would have a database, and you can have SQL files that actually then will link and interface with DBmaestro in order to be able to get them published or deployed onto the right target environments. Last slide for me. The other part of integration is when it comes to making sure that people don't have to leave the environment to just get an understanding as to where they are. So team efficiency is very important. So we will allow you to exchange data and metadata across the different tools and provide you flexibility in sourcing models. We do that by allowing you to integrate with any revision repository. So whether, I've already said, whether it's Git or Subversion or CDS or a Classical ClearCase or TFS or whatever, any revision repository can be linked, as well as when you actually are going to call different tools and run jobs or rules, you can actually just drill from that rule and see what activities have been done and the results of that activity and drill into that. So you can see exactly what happened, and also the data, the return codes of that call can be used in subsequent steps inside the rule. So that actually is in general how we actually collaborate across different tools. And I would like to turn it over to Cindy so that she can specifically talk about how this can be applied and used in the context of database deployment. And she will elaborate a little bit more about how dealing with changes on databases actually is a topic that actually needs the accurate or adequate focus as well. Cindy, over to you.
All right, thanks, Eddie. So when we talk about database...
I think you're on mute.
Well, I thought I unmuted. Okay, can you hear me? It says I'm unmuted. Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. So when we talk about continuous delivery for database, we looked at a survey that DZone ran, and they showed that 61% of companies have implemented some type of continuous delivery project for building their applications. And then another 33% want to implement. So that's a very large number. But when you look at the rate for implementing the continuous delivery for databases, it's only 30%. So that's less than half of the application rate. And what we find is, of that 30%, really only 13% are actually performing continuous delivery practices for the database. The rest are still using very manual processes. And manual processes, they really can't scale or match the continuous delivery frequency, and they're not repeatable, and they're very prone to error. Oops, one too many. Hold on, let me go back one. So there's a few root cause problems that cause issues with database deployment. Dealing with the source control process is different than with the application source code such as .NET and Java. Deployments, whether static or dynamic, are challenging. Once you have a solution for your source code and you deal with your builds, you need to leverage everything into automation. Not only automation, but continuous delivery processes, which would enable you to move from one environment to the other and stop if something breaks. So how do we deal with those challenges? When we look at version control, we have a process where you check out an object if you want to make a change, you modify it, and you check it back in. It's a closed loop. If you want to make a change, it has to go back to the repository to take effect. The database is different. It runs as a separate process. So the scripts have no connection to the actual database object and may require different versions to create or alter the object. When you want to introduce a change, you have to get the latest revision out of the version control, but there's nothing to enforce that. Then you put your object in the database. After making your changes, you test and you debug to complete your database change. You have to extract that database object back into a script to put it back into the version control. This is the flow that many companies are following. What happens if the script is not added back to the version control? An older copy of the script will be executed, causing many issues. Until you run the script, you don't know what issues it might find. It cannot provide the red flags or changes or provide auditing information. So the version control could be out of sync from the database and not really act as a single source of truth. So using scripts, people are used to creating the Delta scripts to edit the procedure, change a table, etc. When they want to move the changes to the next environment, they execute the scripts and everything runs fine. If they have another team, they do the same. You need to remember that each environment holds the entire content, the entire configuration of the database. That means if I have a third team working on hotfixes, introducing changes to the staging environment, then to production, I will have configuration drift. So we'll build through the different changes. So they've added a process, and so now production is out of sync. The configuration of the database is now different than what I expect. So things that worked when I wrote the script could produce unexpected results. Configuration drift is a major concern for databases. Others are using compare and sync tools to see changes between the environments and create the scripts to move the changes. Compare and sync tools show the changes. In this example, say the source is development and the target is production. There's a new index in development, so I should probably deploy it. But now if the index is not in development, but it exists in production, the default action would be to drop the index. The DBA might question whether that index was added as a hotfix for a performance issue. The change script requires manual inspection by someone with detailed knowledge of the changes, so automation is really not possible. These tools cannot really deal with the conflict and merges from different teams. They're unaware of the changes in the target environment and do not leverage the version control. So how do we deal with these challenges? We need a stable working platform that can leverage the version control knowledge into deployment decisions. So instead of working with two isolated processes, we need to work with one process that is integrated into the database and enforced for the database. What that means is we need to follow the same proven process we have for the application code. If I do not check out the application code, then I cannot influence that code's behavior. We should do the same for the database. Unless I check out the object from the database, I shouldn't be allowed to make any changes. That enforces the same process. If I cannot change it without checking out the object, that prevents code overwrites. If I have checked out, then no one else can check out the object, and the database prevents more than one copy of an object. It also prevents undocumented changes. To introduce a change, you need to check out the object, which is documented and visible to other users. When you check in the object, it is documented for you, who changed it, when you changed it, etc. You wouldn't change your application code without version control, but people are making changes to the databases without it. So how would that look? You'd have a status of the object, history of the objects, labels. Everyone could see exactly what's happening. You can take the traditional development process and apply it to the database. One way we can work with the static scripts, pushing them forward, but also validating that the target environment holds what we expect it to hold. That means if I did something, I created version 1.5 out of 1.4, perhaps added an index, then moving to the next environment. First of all, before running the command, I need to validate and understand that I'm in version 1.4. If I have something else here, there's a conflict. I need to understand why it's different. I don't want to do anything automatic. I need to issue a conflict alert and stop the automation. The last thing I want to do is assume it's okay and apply the same command. I need to account for configuration drift. Another way is taking decisions ad hoc, meaning during the build process. This would be described as a three-way analysis or a baseline aware analysis. Many ALM tools are doing this, and now it's available for the database. Not only am I looking at my source and target, I'm looking at my previous environment, meaning where I'm coming from. If the environments are identical, there's nothing to deploy. If development is now different than the previous version, that's easy to understand that I've created a change. And if the integration environment is identical, then I have no conflicts. So let's deploy the change. But if development has not changed, it's still as it used to be, and the integration environment has changed, that means that someone else, another team, has deployed something, or the DBA has fixed something in production. I need to be aware of it. I need to make sure that I don't take this out-of-date copy and override the target environment. I need to protect my target. All of these can be done automatically. I might come to a situation where I'm doing some development, changing some objects, about to deploy them, then I found out a team working in parallel has already deployed changes to that target. This is clearly a conflict. It can be solved automatically, but the usual process is to stop, review the changes, and make a decision. So let's look at an example. If my development doesn't hold an index, but my production holds an index, now looking at the baseline in the middle, my previous version gives me the context of what it looked like. If we had the index before and we've dropped it in development, then we should process the change. If I didn't have the index in the previous version and I still don't have it in development, then it's clear that this change is not coming from my team, so I shouldn't override this copy and I should protect my target. So I talked about conflicts which can be resolved in a same manner. I know what the process version was, I know what the previous version was, I know what changes I made in my development, but I find out that someone has deployed other changes to the target environment. So I need to merge the changes. And you can see where we've taken the different changes from the different versions and merged them together. In addition to code and table structures, this can be done for metadata. We also need to control our lookup tables, our dictionaries. The metadata that describes the applications, how it is to behave, is part of that configuration and needs to be pushed with each release. We need an end-to-end process for the automation. We can describe the process to automate it and integrate it with other tools in the pipeline. We can alert an out-of-process change. We can prevent changes from being fed to QA if they are not coming through development. We can control how we want the process to proceed, either alert that something has drifted from the configuration or force it to go through the pipeline from the beginning. This gives us a lot of control and helps us enforce the best practices of modern application development on top of the database. Impact analysis allows the process to raise red flags on conflicts and stop the line if human intervention is required. So think of a bottling plant. If a bottle gets stuck, then the line gets held up. Someone has to stop the line. They have to go fix it and continue it. So the same thing. If you have an issue, you don't want the line to continue, so you can stop the line and fix the issue. So safer and more efficient than performing damage control after the fact. The Security and Compliance Report allows you to monitor for unauthorized attempts to change the database objects. You can push alerts to a Security Operations Center and use the report to verify compliance. To summarize what I've described, DBmaestro offers database-enforced source control. This helps us put the building blocks into place, help identify the conflicts and merge them, connects to the build process, and at the same time helps enforce security and regulation. Everything is being logged, everything is being documented. Not only can we see who did what, when, where, and why, but also say who should do what and prevent unauthorized access. And here are some names of some of our selected customers. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Eddie.
Thank you. So let's see if I can move on. Okay. So yeah, what you hear is that there is a lot of synergies when it comes to getting end-to-end insight, getting control, getting change tracking, and getting authorization, etc. done. Now let's take a closer look at how the integration actually is done. I'm not going to go into too much technical detail here, but similar to what we do with other integrations, Clarive actually has a variety of ways we can connect to different systems. And with DBmaestro, we actually use the REST web service API. So we actually use that for the connection, for projects, and for change set into change. And we use our Flex agent in order to be able to do service activities like setting credentials, doing impact analysis, doing the actual deployments, etc. So this is the way how we interact with the system. The way how it works is similar to what we do with other integrations, is that in Clarive you have the concept of a change set, or a release that contains the modifications that were done on assets. So in this case, the user creates a change set to accomplish some project requirements, and it then actually will check out the corresponding DBmaestro table data and says, okay, this is the data that was modified. And based on that will be associated with the change set, and when the change set is going to be deployed and moved to a certain platform, you can see those revisions being part within the Clarive change set, and it will automatically interact with DBmaestro in order to be able to deploy that on the corresponding platform. So this is totally transparent. It's consistent with all the other platforms. So you're treating your deployment to a database the same way as you would do with the with other target platforms. So when you're actually going to do the deployment, we actually or the user creates a job, or it's being triggered by some modification that was done elsewhere, and then the execution of the job will actually will execute the activities in the right point in time, and it will interface, in this case, through the agent with DBmaestro in order to be able to do the physical deployment onto the certain databases. So that means that you work at a higher level of abstraction across all the platforms. And from a visibility point of view, as I've shown in my screenshots before, part of the checkout of the baselines, etc. So the script itself, you see at some point that it will actually extract the information. It will actually just create the nature and say, hey, this is a DBmaestro nature. So we're going to start the server. We're actually going to do the deployment and the analysis. We're going to actually do the physically modification on the database. And if at some point there is data being returned from DBmaestro, you can just click on the details and you see exactly the details of the impact analysis that was accessed through the log report. So that means that once you're in Clarive, you can stay in Clarive. You don't have to actually switch between tools in order to be able to get your complete details. So same with when it comes to the deployment orchestration during the run execution step, so that you can see here exactly what was done, and you can review that straight from within the tool without having to leave the environment. So a little bit, as a wrap up, a little bit about who we are as a company. As Clarive, many of you actually might not have heard about us yet, although last year we actually have been very active in EMEA. We're currently actually expanding and have our offices open in the New York area as well. We're actually currently represented in all continents, so we actually have partners and or direct representation in Asia Pacific, in South Africa, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Latin America, as well as in North America, including also in Russia. So our focus is on providing an integral end-to-end solution for delivering a DevOps platform for the evolving enterprise. So that means that we would like you to start today, and we will move with you all the way to support an automation platform that you need it. The company actually has been founded in 2010, but the mustard, as you wish, or the core intellectual property has been built over our consultancy services in the past 2 decades in various implementations in previous companies that our CEO, CIO, myself, etc. worked for. So we actually have been doing it in the field for a long time, and we actually abstracted from it, created a tool that has been combining that intellectual property into a single solution that is now as flexible as it can be when it comes to interfacing with other tools because we recognize that you would like to leverage the investment that you have, and B, you would like to be able to automate and get started today. So we would like you to support that neutral of revision repository that you have and other technology that you'd like to take. So in summary, why are customers choosing Clarive and why are customers interested in this integration with DBmaestro is that customers are seeing that they have too many tools, and that many of the tools actually just they're using it from a limited point of view, and they actually pay a premium price for it. And sometimes they can replace things with Clarive if they decide to. The second key challenge that they have, and that's actually one of the biggest that we encounter, is that they have too many platforms, but there is no central orchestration piece that actually can glue it all together. With as a result, they do a lot of manual activities, and database is one of them. And this is why the tandem or the coupling with DBmaestro is so unique and so powerful, because both products actually use the same concept and mentality and philosophy, but combined together, you have a very strong end-to-end collaborative platform for a DevOps environment where you can just treat a database as any other platform. As I said, many customers actually are turning also to Clarive because they feel that most of the DevOps tools that they find in the bucket of DevOps tools today are too much HR focused and too much focusing on continuous delivery, which they feel is too restrictive in use, and we believe so as well. And if you look at the latest reports, whether it's from Forrester or Gartner, they also claim and say that organizations should look at technology that can support either the bimodal enterprise or the evolving enterprise, because not everybody is in a microservices world yet with everything as loosely coupled modules. So if you're not there yet, you still would like to start today, because you can start today if you use the right platform for doing it. Getting end-to-end visibility is a key aspect, especially if you're being audited or you need to confirm or comply with Sarbanes-Oxley or other standards. So having that visibility, we can help you with that from an end-to-end perspective. So these are the top reasons why customers actually are choosing Clarive over other technologies. I'm going to skip this slide and maybe then turn it over to you, Sarah, to see if there are any questions from anyone, to either Cindy or myself, that need to be addressed. So we'd like to open it up for questions now.
Yes, thank you very much, Cynthia and Eddie. I do have a few questions. First of all, does it support ETL code Informatica promotion and business object BI tool code promotion?
Yeah, so I don't know, Cynthia, if it is something that you would like to answer. Typically in ETL tools, because I've been in that business for 6-7 years, there is a lot of data transformation that's happening, a lot of scripting there happening as well. We can treat, from a Clarive perspective, we can treat any type of code as code, so including ETL scripts, etc. When it comes to database changes before you actually do the transitions, that's something that probably Cynthia or Cindy needs to answer. But from our perspective, when it comes to changes in the logic of the transformation and the coding that needs to happen, we can treat that and we can interact with any ETL tool that you have in place. With the well, if they provide an API, we can link with it. The easiest ones to link with are those that are based with either a command line or a web service API. But even if it's a Java or a C++ interface, we can always wrap around that and actually provide that integration if need be. That's not a problem. Cindy, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, so DBmaestro will control the structure changes. So if you need to do, structure changes before you load that data, for some data like reference data, we can actually source control the data. So if this is reference data you're loading, then it can also be managed under the source control, but most likely it's like data warehousing type data, so you would just manage any of your structure changes with DBmaestro.
Okay, thank you very much. The second one is, how is DevOps related to continuous delivery?
Good, let me take that one. As I said, the continuous delivery is the process of being able to deliver in a continuous fashion based on some, within quotes, triggers that are happening inside the environment. So from a Clarive perspective, we can actually trigger a build and a deployment based on an event that's happening. Like, for example, a new commit into a repository, we can trigger that. So that's in a continuous mode that we can operate. Now, very often in DevOps, it's not always, as I said before, it's not always continuous yet. And for some applications, you don't want, or you might not want to actually do that continuous because it's interconnected. So it all has to do with the more isolation you can put in place, the more you can actually work in a continuous fashion in an easy way. If it's still too much connected, then we can work, and that's that I prefer the term at the speed of business, where you say, okay, based on some conditions, whatever those conditions might be, it might be a push of a button, it might be something else, we actually gonna allow the deployment to happen. So it's not continuous, but it's like faster than what it was before, and you can make it as fast as the business actually allows or accepts it. So in the spectrum of where you are or many organizations are today versus continuous, DevOps actually can start today where you are and actually can move and help you reduce the speed up to a way that is all the way to continuous. And with our DevOps platform, we allow you to go through that transition from end to end.
Okay, thank you very much. Just another comes up. For database deployment, does it work with IBM DB2 UDB on AIX?
Yeah, so today DBmaestro works with Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server. We have MySQL and DB2 on our roadmap, but I don't have any specific release dates at this time.
Okay, and what happens when database deployment gets into errors? Does it roll back all changes?
Yes, you can create a rollback script so that it depends on where the errors occur. If the errors occur in certain places, it'll roll back automatically. If it occurs later, like you've already finished the deployment, but you decided that you didn't want to deploy that, then you can create a rollback script to roll back the changes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have one last one. Which are the recommendations for how to start continuous delivery? The last one will be, how does DBmaestro connect with release management tools?
Were these two questions at the same time? Because I didn't really catch the question.
Oh, sorry. First one, let's go with recommendations for how to start continuous delivery.
Well, how to start continuous delivery is first of all, you need to assess where you currently are in, one, your technical assessments or technical infrastructure. How complex is your current environment when it comes to delivery platforms and infrastructure in place? Secondly, you need to look at the architectural landscape when it comes to your applications. How interconnected are they today? And what is the roadmap for getting more into loosely coupled architectures? So that's on the technical front. Secondly, you need to assess your organizational cultural readiness. And that's something that as Clarive, we actually have something that we call a Clarivity assessment, where we actually can assess organizational readiness and maturity when it comes to being ready for implementing a DevOps type of approach, which is very much aligned with Lean IT, by the way. And this helps you to understand, okay, this is how our teams work together. This is how we actually collaborate today. This is how handshaking and a handover is being done. And based on that, you can define a roadmap on changes organizationally or culturally in combination with architecturally in order to see what steps you can take first when. So it's not something that you can answer for every organization in one simple blueprint. So typically what we do is we do those type of assessment in 2 dimensions, and based on that, which is something that I can recommend everyone of asking for, we can actually just recommend what the best approach for each organization to take the next step in their DevOps journey.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And for you, Cindy, how does DBmaestro connect with release management tools?
Okay, so Eddie kind of explained how we integrate in with Clarive, and it's very similar. So sometimes we have a plugin where you can execute the DBmaestro commands from the release tool, but we have an API interface, so you can always have the release tool execute the DBmaestro commands to do the build and the deployment of your database changes. So that's how we do the integration.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining the WebEx. I will wrap it up here from my end. If you have any further questions, you can either contact Cindy. You see her email address, or you can contact myself or Sarah. And I hope you enjoyed it, and hope to work with you in the future. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.